It had been a long time since Resident Evil was considered to be the king of horror. After Resident Evil 6, many fans felt that the series had officially lost its way, and for some people, it may have been even before that. But all of that changed when Resident Evil 7 came out. This was the glorious return of true survival horror in Resident Evil. For me, this is an A-tier game. I absolutely love the horror in Resident Evil 7. This is one of the scariest games in the series. The first hour of this game alone puts this game up so high because of how terrifying it is. RE7 has this sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre inspiration to it, and it works so well. The Baker family, I think, is overall a pretty good set of villains. Jack easily being my favorite of the group. I also thought it was pretty nice to see a Resident Evil game in first person. I thought that was a very smart choice. I've heard some people say that it was a bad idea for it to go into first person because it mimics sort of other first person horror games and stuff like that. I'm going to be honest, I think that is a bullshit ass answer. I think that if it wasn't third person, these same people who are bitching about that would want it to be with the camera angle style, and if they did that, they would just be bitching that Capcom ran out of ideas. I don't believe that shit at all. I think that the first person perspective works excellent for Resident Evil. On top of the return of survival horror, we got the return of item management and puzzles. Something that I was waiting for what felt like forever. And it's really cool too because there's a lot of callbacks to the original game. You know, swapping the broken shotgun for the real shotgun. That's the first one that I immediately think of, and it's just like, you know what, they do care and they do remember. Also, it takes place in a house for a good chunk of the game, which is just like the original mansion. It's pretty sweet. But there are a couple problems. Number one, it doesn't announce the title. And frankly, from here on out, Resident Evil games no longer announce the title. Why? It's tradition, man. Let us hear you announce the title. It's fun. It gets everybody in the mood to play some Resident Evil. Now on to some real problems. Personally, I am not a big fan of the main character, Ethan. I just think he's so stale and boring. Resident Evil has a history of characters that are badass. I mean, think about them. Leon, Chris, Claire, Jill, the list goes on. And to have this character be this boring and stale is a little bit rough, I won't lie. I'm not one of those people that just wants to play as Chris and Jill only, but if you're gonna make a new character, you have to make him better. I mean, in my opinion, I think he's only better than some of the partner characters in Resident Evil 6, but that's it. There's no, I would rather play as just about any other character in this series over Ethan Winters. The second issue that I have with this game is the lack of real enemy variety. You really only fight one enemy type throughout the entire game, and it's the mold. Now, when we look back at other Resident Evils, okay, you always had your main zombies, right? You had your normal zombies, but there was also hunters or lickers or crows and giant spiders. None of that is here in Resident Evil 7. It's molded for the start to the game to the very end. I did say earlier that I thought Jack was a great villain, but the other villains are not as good. Margaret is fucking creepy as hell, and Lucas, that's another character that I kind of, I thought he was just okay. But other than that, I really do think that this is a phenomenal game, and anybody who wants to get into Resident Evil, I still recommend this wholeheartedly.
Resident Evil 2.
Now it is time to talk about the Resident Evil 2 remake. I remember when this game was announced, and I was so excited. I could not wait to play it. Resident Evil 2 is my favorite Resident Evil of all time. So to see it finally get a remake, I could not contain my excitement. I remember pre-ordering it, I remember getting it on release, and I was not disappointed. I love the Resident Evil 2 remake, and that's why for me, it is in S tier as well. Whenever my friends ask me what Resident Evil I should start with, this is the game I always tell people, this is a great place to start. Because you get to sort of experience the real story of Resident Evil 2 in modern standards. I honestly feel like the Resident Evil 2 remake hit it out of the park. Now, I don't love RE2 Remake over the original. I mean, how could I? I've played through the original a million times. I grew up with the game. There's always going to be that level of love with the original that the remake just won't have. And frankly, I do think there are problems with the remake that there shouldn't have been, but we'll get to that in just a second. For now, though, let's just talk about how great this game is. Number one, this game looks amazing. I absolutely love the art style in this game. The lighting is perfect. And Leon and every character model and all the zombies and all the gore looks amazing. Item management, true survival horror, and wonderful level design. That is what you really want in a Resident Evil game, and this does it with flying colors. I also really have to say that I really enjoy Claire's game a lot more in the remake than I do in the original. Claire's game in the original wasn't bad, but it was the weaker one of the two discs when you were playing as either Leon or Claire, but in the remake, they made it so much more fun to play as Claire. And speaking of, actually, I love the sub-scenarios with Ada and Sherry in this game, way more than I did in the original. It's nice that we see different aspects and different areas of their sub-scenarios that we never got to see in the original. I do also like how they kept us on our toes by bringing in Mr. X on the first scenario along with William Birkin. I thought that was a really excellent choice because it certainly surprised me the first time I played it. I thought that was awesome. But that does sort of bring in some of my minor issues with the remake. So with the original Resident Evil 2, the two scenarios that you played, they felt like different games. In scenario A, you were dealing with William Birkin. In scenario B, you dealt with Mr. X. And especially with the B scenario, we got to see a way more industrial look to the laboratory than we did in the remake. People sometimes complain about missing content in remakes, and while this is not a game breaker for me, obviously, I do wish that they did include the more industrial aspect of the laboratory in scenario B, because when you get later into the game, it does start to feel like, well, wait a minute, how did Claire and Leon not meet up and run into each other at this point? Small stuff like that, not the end of the world though. The remake, however, offers so many ways to play. I mean, you get your normal difficulty, your hardcore, but you also get Fourth Survivor. You also get little extra modes that tell more of the story of Raccoon City. We get to see what happens to the mayor's daughter. We get to see what happens to Hunk and all that sort of stuff. It's awesome. There is so much to do in the Resident Evil 2 remake that it is criminal. If you have not played RE2 Remake and you've just maybe been holding out on it for a while, it is a must play. Resident Evil 3 Remake is probably the most painfully disappointing Resident Evil game that there is. This game easily could have been an S tier or A tier game, but I have to give it extremely painful C tier. You know, some people might say that and think that's crazy. I would rate it that high. But truthfully, I would rather play this game over Resident Evil 6. I'd rather play it over Resident Evil 0. But this game hurts. This hurts to play through because it's not exactly what it is, it's what it could have been. Whenever a game is being remade, I want to see differences. I'm not one of these people who wants just the exact same level design, and I don't want the same game all over again. Please give me surprises. Please alter some levels. And you know what? If you want to cut a certain area, that's totally fine with me. But this game does all that in the wrong way. The Resident Evil 3 Remake is missing huge portions of the original game. No clock tower, no Raccoon Park. We don't get to see the awesome cutscene of Nemesis killing Brad, and we don't even go into the police station here. Also with the remake, I want to feel the spirit of the original game in the remake. I know that sounds fruity and lame, but that's the truth of it. I want it to feel like the developers who made the remake love the original like I do. And the changes that they make should be understandable. But the amount of cut content in this game does not make any sense. You know, no Gravedigger boss fight. A lot of the boss fights with Nemesis are heavily altered. And speaking of Nemesis, he's not as scary in this game. In fact, that's probably the biggest crime that this game has. Is that in the original game, Nemesis is terrifying. But here, he's more like a nuisance. He's not really all that scary. And that's really a shame because this is one of the coolest monsters of all time. But I still think there are overall fun and good things about this game. It still looks amazing. You know, it looks amazing. It's nice that we get to roam around Raccoon City for a little bit. I think the dodging mechanic overall is executed better here than it was in the original. I still like Carlos, but Jill's kind of the problem here. Jill's character in this game, in the remake, she feels like a bitch. You know, people who rate this game highly, I feel like you didn't play the original, and that's okay. I'm not here to say that you're not allowed to like this game. Overall, I still think there's a lot of stuff to like about the Resident Evil 3 remake. If you haven't played the original 3 though, I highly recommend you do, if you ever find a way to. And then you'll understand why people like me or others out there feel that this game is a massive disappointment. Because it just doesn't hit the same marks, and it frankly does not have the spirit of RE3. Maybe one day we'll see RE3 remade again. I kind of doubt it. You know, they already remade it once. I think them remaking it again, even doing a good job, would just be confusing to a lot of people. It would be nice to see a Resident Evil 3 remake get the proper attention and love that it deserves. But in the meantime, that's just all we have to work with. And that kind of hurts. Following up Resident Evil 7 was going to be a tough thing to do. But with Resident Evil 8, I can happily say that I think for the most part, they did a very good job. Resident Evil 8 to me is a solid B-tier game. I think what they did with the formula here was interesting to say the least. The action in this game is pretty good. But it does make me wish that the horror was a little bit stronger. Because you're able to combat and kill so many things, you don't feel quite as scared, you know what I mean? It's a lot of the same issues that I kind of feel with the original Resident Evil 4. But in a way, though, I still think this game does horror better than RE4. First half of this game is excellent. I loved Lady Dimitrescu's castle and the dollhouse. The castle felt like classic Resident Evil. That's what made it great. It felt like we were just doing our thing in RE, and that felt awesome. You know, I also kind of like Lady Dimitrescu's sort of design. I like her as a villain. She's pretty cool. And after the castle, we go to the dollhouse. And man, the dollhouse in this game is so fucking intense and awesome. It makes me wish that the whole game was like that, because it was fucking scary. And it takes away all your weapons, and you're just left with nothing. It's excellent. But how about the second half of the game? Overall, I would still say it's fun. It's still good. But I think the factory section of the game is overall meh. There is a weird Resident Evil 5 reference, though. That was pretty funny when he talks about Chris. And speaking of Chris, he's back in the game. He's back in the series. Too bad we don't play as him, though. We still play as Ethan Winters, and all the complaints I had about him in Resident Evil 7 are right into Resident Evil 8. Admittedly, overall, I think he's a better character, but not by much. I would still rather play as Leon or Jill or Chris, at least for the whole game. We play as Chris for like 10 minutes, and if you've played the game, you already know exactly what part I'm talking about, when it feels like you're just playing Mercenaries mode in the main game. I won't lie, I think this part of the game is actually really fun. I don't mind it so much because it's only for like 10 minutes, and it does its thing, and then it's over. And I was like, well, that was a nice little break from the horror and survival aspects. It was nice to see that. But overall, I think Resident Evil 8 is a solid game. There's this sort of level of hatred that surrounds it, which I don't really understand. You know, people talk about how bad the story is and everything like that. But I will say this about Resident Evil stories. You know, they're B-movie scripts. Every story is. Even, like, as scary as the games have always been, the plots are taken from B-horror movies. I wouldn't say that stories in Resident Evil were the best in gaming. I love them to death because I love B-horror movies, but I feel like people dog on this story a little too hard when there's major things that we can look at in Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil even like 2 and 3. But overall, I think Resident Evil 8 is a very good game. The gameplay is way better than the story, so you will want to finish this game just for the gameplay. The story is kind of weak, but I still really enjoy 8. And if you liked 4, or if you liked even 7, you will really like 8. Maybe not as much, but I still think that 8 is a very solid game all around.
Resident Evil 4.
We have finally arrived at the latest game released in the series, the Resident Evil 4 Remake. And this is going to be a little controversial, but I put RE4 Remake in S tier. I think the Resident Evil 4 Remake is better than the original Resident Evil 4. I can already hear people mashing away at their keyboards right now, but truthfully, if I was going to design a Resident Evil 4 Remake, this is how it would be. This was everything that I wanted to see in Resident Evil 4 Remake. I think this game has a way more emphasis on horror than the original ever did. I absolutely love the lighting in this game. I love the gore. I love the action in it. I've gone through this game like 4 times since it came out, and I've gone through it on hardcore and normal. I love it, love it, love it. I love not having quick time events in every other second of the game. I love the parry system. I thought that was an excellent idea. I love seeing all the remade locations And I also love that a lot of the locations that I hated in the original are absent here, or heavily altered. I love that about this game, because in my opinion, the original, as much as I've played through it and as much as I love it, there's always a few sections of the game that just drive me up a wall. And I'm never looking forward to them when I play them. Like I said, I've beaten this game 4 times. There's not a section that I just kind of like get an allergic reaction to when I get there in the remake. I love this game from start to finish. But what about Ashley? You know, that's the big one. Because in the original, you know, a lot of people hated Ashley. I personally didn't. I feel like that was a little bit overblown, but that was just me. But in this game, yeah, no one complained about Ashley in this game. Everybody thought that she was done perfectly in here. There's also no annoying inventory system management in this game. You know, that's one of the things that bothered me about the original. It felt like that if you picked something up, you would have to immediately start sorting shit around, because if you didn't, you would then spend like 5 to 10 minutes playing Tetris in your inventory system, and I never really found that to be all that fun. I don't really care for that style of inventory management in any game, whether it's Diablo or Resident Evil 4. I put up with it if the game is good, which it is, but I don't really care to see it. So to have an auto sort button was amazing. I love the brutality of this game. I love every little nook and cranny in here. I love all the secrets. I love getting all the costumes and everything like that. In my opinion, the Resident Evil 1 remake and the Resident Evil 2 remake are like the blueprints on how to properly remake a game. You know, some people complain that some of the characters in this remake are not as good as the original, and they're not wrong. But I will say this, they made other characters that weren't all that great in the original a lot better in the remake. So basically what happened was, in the original, the villains are written better, and in the remake, one of your allies and one of the villains is written better. It's not really an overall a bad thing. If I had to say one thing about the remake that is objectively kind of bad, is that sometimes visual clarity can get a little odd, especially if you're looking down the scope of a rifle. In some sections, it can be hard to like hit a headshot, but that's about it. I love everything about this game. It's phenomenal. Just play it. You'll love it. And that was my massive Resident Evil tier list. Let me know what you think about it. I would love to be interested to hear if some people here think I'm a heretic for some of my choices, but it's all in good fun, man. It's just games. I think it's a real good time for us to talk about stuff like this, because we all get to see each other's thoughts on games, and I think that's always cool. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and I'll see you all later.